Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon and for patience to get started here. We have a lot of information to cover, as Eric said, so we'll just get started. We can go through the next slide. So my name is Whitney Finstrom. I'm Senior Manager of the Office of Management and Budget Community Development Division. And joining me as co-presenters are Megan McElhaney, who's a planner with the Community Development Division, as well as Joshua Rollin, who's a planner with the same office, and David Hutchinson, who is Assistant Director of the Office of Management and Budget. So we'd all like to welcome you. Next slide. So I wanted to give you a brief agenda and give you some heads up in terms of the items that we're covering. Obviously, I wanted to welcome you as at the top of this webinar information session, and also give you some background information in terms of the source of the public grant funds. These are from the Housing and Urban Development Agency, and we'll go over types of eligible organizations, eligible public service activities. We'll give you some samples of what those activities look like. We'll get into the public service application itself, and then go into the timeline and the process for submitting the application. And then we'll get into some questions and we'll try to provide some answers to you today. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the public service grant funds come from the Community Development Block Grant Program. It's probably the largest program out of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, as we call it. And the CDBG funds are also probably the largest federal allocation that the city of Pittsburgh receives for housing and community and economic development. So the way it works is Congress approves the amount of CDBG funding that the city of Pittsburgh receives each year. There's a formula that they have based on the city's population, poverty rate, and there's some other socioeconomic factors that they look at to come up with our annual allocation. The city of Pittsburgh is an designated entitlement community, it's called, right? So we get a dedicated allocation every year. We do have to apply for the funding, but we are an entitlement community. So we have a dedicated funding amount. And we receive roughly $14 million in CDBG funds annually. This, of course, it has varied quite a bit. The last couple of years, it's been around 13 to 14 million. That's probably half of what it was, I believe, 10, 20 years ago. So, the program funding has been reduced greatly. There has been an increase in funding in the last year or so due to the COVID crisis. But anyway, in the neighborhood of 14 million is what the city receives. Most of those dollars, the 14 million, go towards infrastructure projects in the city, but there is a $750,000 allocation that's been set aside specifically for the public service grants in general. That includes the mayor's allocation, mayor's office, as well as each council district has allocated about $50,000 per council district to allocate public service funds. Next slide, please. So these are federal funds, and by nature, there are rules attached to them, and we try not to burden organizations, but these organizations seeking public service funds must be a 501c3 nonprofit, tax status with the board of directors, and that means they have written bylaws and they have a federal tax ID number. They have to have a mission that supports the city of Pittsburgh residents, of course, because this is federal funding that comes to the city of Pittsburgh to help support economic and housing development within the city and public services. The organization has to show that they have demonstrated financial management capacity. These, again, are federal funds, so there are a number of federal requirements around making sure that the organizations that receive those funds have the capacity to actually spend those resources in an efficient and correct manner. The organizations must also possess a 9-digit, what's called a DUNS number. It's a data universal numbering system. And we've provided a link on this PowerPoint presentation to get that DUNS number if you don't already have one. You also have to show that there are no financial liabilities outstanding with the city of Pittsburgh, or that you have a demonstrated approved payment plan. So those are just some of the eligibility requirements we wanted to cover with you. Next slide, please. So HUD set up what's called national objectives. These are literally by an act of Congress, right? So we have to follow these guidelines when we make a determination as to how funds are expended. All CDBG funds have to fall under this umbrella, what's called national objectives. And there's sort of three buckets. The one we'll concentrate most on is the one you see to the left, which is low mod income. There are two other categories, slum and blight and urgent need. Urgent need is rarely used. It's usually for natural disasters. We did use it for food banks, as Megan will get into later, to qualify them, but it's for emergencies. If you go to the left, back to the left, low mod, the number of subcategories under that category. The funds have to benefit low mod income persons. Those are people who make under 80% of median household income. So at least 70% of all the 14 million, roughly 14 million of CDBG funds that the city receives must fall under this category. And the other 30% can fall under slum and blight or urgent needs. So just want to give you a framework. These are federal requirements, literally by an act of Congress. So my co-presenter Megan is going to take you through the next couple slides, and we're going to get a little more specific in terms of the public service activities.
So hi, my name is Megan McElhaney. I am a planner with the City of Pittsburgh's Office of Management and Budget Community Development Division. I work with folks who receive public service CDBG funds. Basically, I'll have a caseload of groups and I'll work with them from the contracting to closing out of the final invoice. And I'll be going over different CDBG eligible projects, as well as the three major buckets that projects are supposed to fit into. Just a quick note, if you happen to see me on video, my computer doesn't have a camera, so I'm using a tablet. So if I am looking all the way off screen, I'm just looking at my computer notes. But yeah, so public service CDBG grants can be used for a variety of activities, such as job training programs, childcare, education and youth, services for homeless folks, etc. There's a big list on this slide. And it's certainly not limited to what is listed here, but these are some of the most common kinds of projects that we tend to see. So if we go to the next slide, the core element of the CDBG public service grant is that it must serve people who have low and moderate incomes. For us, this means households with a 30 to 80% area median income, or AMI. You can certainly serve folks who have an income under 30% AMI. We don't want to see a ton of over 80% AMI. And there are three kinds of major project buckets. Your project will have to fit into one of those. And so that is the limited clientele project, or LMC, where you are required to verify income for the people that you serve. This is the most common bucket that people will fall into. There is the area benefit, where your project will serve a census tract where at least 51% of the residents are low or moderate income. And this determination is made using census data and census blocks. And then finally, there are some projects that will fall into the CDBG presumed benefit bucket, which are projects that exclusively serve folks who fall into very specific HUD-defined presumed eligible categories. So we'll go over each of these three buckets in a bit more detail, starting with limited clientele, or LMC, on the next slide. So like I mentioned, LMC is the most common project bucket. This basically encompasses any project where you or your coworkers or your volunteers are having direct contact with clients or program participants. Income verification is a requirement for this category, and there are different ways this can happen. So you'll want to have some sort of income to intake or income certification form. You maybe want to see pay stubs or a benefit statement. For youth programs for children who attend Pittsburgh public schools, the report cards will note whether the student is enrolled in the free or reduced lunch program, and that's something that we have in the past used as a workaround for income verification. If you don't currently have an income verification process in place and you're awarded CDBG funds, please still apply. If you're awarded funds, the planner that you're assigned to from the city will help you develop something that is acceptable to both HUD and the city. But that is a requirement for limited clientele. It's not an optional process. So ultimately, LMC projects must be able to document that at least 51% or more of their program participants are Pittsburgh residents with low or moderate income. We do prefer to see that percentage be a little bit higher than 51%, but that is the bare minimum. Examples of eligible projects under limited clientele are after-school youth sports programs, recreation programs, food banks, pantries, etc. So if we go to the next slide, the next category is area benefit, which is not as common as LMC, but it's still an important part of the CDBG block of funding. So these are projects that are open to and benefit all residents of a CDBG eligible census tract. So again, that's a census tract where 51% or more of residents are low or moderate income. We do have a map and a list of eligible areas on our website, and I believe the map will pop up a little bit later in the slideshow. The key difference between a limited clientele project or LMC project and an area benefit project is that we don't need to see collection of income documentation for an area benefit project. We presume that if the residents in the area, if 51% of them are low or moderate income, then we assume that the project is serving 51% or more low or mod income folks. So examples of qualifying area benefit programs are sewer and water improvements, creation of a neighborhood park, a vacant lot cleanup, or the development of a neighborhood community center that's open to all residents in a qualifying area. And the key word there is development of a community center. It would be a little bit more tricky to try and do ongoing costs of a community center through area benefit. That's something that we would probably want to try to do through LMC instead of area benefit. Another example of something that is not eligible for an area benefit would be a youth program, like a drop-in youth program that happens to be located in a low or moderate income eligible census tract. We would want to see income verification for that kind of program. So that would not be an area benefit, that would be an LMC. So in the case that you're awarded CDBG funds or public service funds, and you're using them to replace state or local non-CDBG funds, then you have a few more steps that you would have to fulfill. So in this case, your project must either be a new service for your organization, or you must be able to show a quantifiable increase of an existing service. Exceptions to these requirements may be made if HUD determines that any decrease in level of service was the result of events not within the control of local government. Most people won't be subject to this. I really wouldn't expect this to see, I wouldn't expect to see this impact many folks. If this does apply to you and you're awarded public service funds, you'd be able to talk it out at length with whatever planner you're assigned to from the city. So it's an extra step, but it's definitely not a barrier to accessing these funds. So if we go to the next slide. Okay. So these slides are a little bit out of order, so I do apologize for any confusion that causes, but we're going to jump back to limited clientele income verification for a second. So as I had mentioned previously, we determine low and moderate income eligibility using household area median income. I'm sure a lot of people on the line are familiar with this, but for those who aren't, it's based on household size and income brought in by every person in the household over the age of 18. So for example, in a 4-person household with 2 adults and 2 children, the income of the adults would be counted for a household of 4, but any income being brought in by like a 16-year-old wouldn't be counted in the overall household income. So this means gross income before any payroll deductions, and the income source must be current, meaning within 90 days. So this annual wage income would include this list that you see on the slide: your wages, salaries, overtime, commissions, fees, tips, bonuses, unemployment payments, disability, workers' comp, severance pay, alimony, child support, net income from the operation of a business, TANF, or Social Security and Social Security income. And then on the next slide, we see that the CDBG income limits for program year 2020. These are the income limits that are currently in effect and will remain in effect presumably until June 30th, 2021, when we'll get a new one. You can see it's broken up by household and what the limitations for each household size for 30% AMI, 50% AMI, and 80% AMI are. So ultimately, any of the program participants that would be receiving services and funds from the CDBG program, we would want to see them fall under these limits, these income limits. So the final bucket for CDBG public service projects is presumed benefit. This means clientele who are generally presumed to be principally low or moderate income. These include abused children, elderly persons, which for our purposes means folks who are age 62 and older. Battered spouses, which I know is an outdated term, but that is the HUD definition that we still have to work with. Homeless persons, illiterate adults, persons living with AIDS, migrant farm workers, which is something that we don't really typically see in the Pittsburgh area, and then severely disabled adults. That's an important distinction. I know on the slide it says severely disabled persons. Severely disabled children do not qualify under presumed benefit. You can certainly still have a program that serves severely disabled children, but you would have to collect income on those households, income verification for them. So basically, oh, back one still, sorry. So essentially, if your program is working exclusively with any of these populations, we don't want to see it mixed with non-presumed eligible people. If you are working exclusively with any one of these populations, you don't have to collect income verification for those persons, but you will still need to report on the number of people served as well as their race and ethnicity. Next slide, please. So this is the map that I kind of referenced earlier. This is the most current map of CDBG area benefit eligible census tracts. Like I said before, you can find this map on our website to be able to view it in a bit of a larger version. We also have a list that goes neighborhood by neighborhood and notes what areas are eligible and what isn't. Again, this map and that list only apply to area benefit folks. If your project falls under limited clientele or presumed benefit, you don't have to worry about this map. And that's all I've got.
Okay, and then I'm going to pick it up from Megan. Hello, my name is Josh Roland. I'm also a planner in the office, and I'll be working with some organizations with their public service grant as well. So these next few slides, so for this slide, this is explaining a little bit about how would an organization that has received has been allocated funds, how will they be able to use this grant? We want you to have some things in mind as you apply, which is when you're accessing these funds, these are all for reimbursement. So all of your expenses must be already expended before we can recoup those. There's sort of these different steps that we have listed here. So obviously the nature of a reimbursement grant, the grantee would pay for whatever those goods and services are as agreed upon in our grant agreement. Then you would submit documentation to our office, whichever planner you have, that shows that you've spent those funds, and then the city will review, maybe work with you if we have any questions on the documentation you gave us, and then issue a check. This is roughly a 30-day process, so obviously these funds will not be sort of available as a lump grant once you've been allocated those funds. It'll be drawn down with the city over time. Just staying on this slide for a second, I wanted to, or the other slide. Just staying on this slide for a second, I just wanted to give a couple examples of some documentation that we might need. Just so if you receive a grant to pay for staff time, some of the documentation we would need would be timesheets showing the time of the staff member and payroll corresponding to that. And some documentation that we might need for program supplies would be the invoices showing that money has been spent. Just wanted to make a note of those. So now talking about the application itself. The application is available online. You can see the link here. uh, uh, the grant opportunities page on our webpage. On there, you'll find a link for a Google form application, which will allow you to complete that through Google Forms. If you're not familiar with using Google Forms, it does not allow you to save your progress. You sort of have to complete it all in one sitting, potentially maybe writing up some of your responses on a Word document if it's going to take you a little while to put the information together, and then transferring that onto the form. Once you've hit submit at the bottom of that form, it'll automatically be sent to the city. Just a note on the grant request that you can submit. You can see here it's a very wide range between 2,500 and 150,000. Just for your information, in 2020, the average grant was about $4,000, like a little bit less than $5,000. So just keep that in mind as expectations when you apply. We would like, just for the speed in which we can review these applications, we would prefer these applications be submitted online, but you can request a paper application to mail into us if you prefer. You can reach out to us at community.development@pittsburghpa.gov, and you'll see the email later in the presentation to request that paper form. Important date here for the deadline is Friday, May 28th. We cannot accept applications after that date. Please, if you have any questions or anything, please be sure to email us at least a few days before the deadline, since we'll be processing applications on the actual deadline day. We also wanted to make a note, if you've applied for this type of funding in the past, please be aware that some of the questions have changed even from last year. So, we highly recommend that you take a look at the application in detail and sort of understand that some things have changed from previous years. Next slide. The other important piece of your total application package will be these attachments that you must submit as well. So the Google application form will be submitted, like I said, immediately after you've hit submit. There's a part 2 that'll be outlined at the bottom there as a reminder that you also have to email, you will have to email up to 2 attachments. One will be a client intake form if you currently are verifying incomes for your clients, which is that limited clientele that Megan was talking about earlier. And then that attachment B is the IRS 990 form, whichever easy or whichever applies to your organization. You must submit that to us as well. I think yes, if you can go to the next slide. So I went over some of this already, but basically, just as a reminder, this is where the Google form application is located on the grant opportunities page on this pittsburghpa.gov website. As I mentioned before, the Google Forms will not be saved, will not save your progress until you've submitted the application. So you must sort of complete it all and then submit it to make sure that it all went in. When you are when you're submitting those attachments, which is the second part of this package, please email community.development@pittsburghpa.gov, which you see at the bottom here, the second to last line here. And in the subject line of the email, please make sure your organization's name is listed, as well as PS 2021 to identify which application you're applying for. We also ask that there's some directions on the application itself, but if you are able to submit those attachments in a compressed folder, basically we just want to make sure that we don't lose track of those attachments. If it's in a compressed folder, whenever we download your attachments, they will all already have your organization's name on it, and there's no chance of us losing one of those. And finally, another reminder that if you would like a mail-in application, to please email us, and we can coordinate getting that for you. I think it's going over to Whitney now to close this out.
Thanks, Josh and Megan, for that overview. I also wanted to provide you with the timeline, just to give you a heads up about what's coming along, coming up in the next couple of months. So obviously today's the information session. And the thing that we're doing that's different from last year is we're going to have a couple of Q&A sessions coming up. These are every Friday, starting April 30th, and then May 7th, and then May 14th for an hour. And this is an open format. It's an opportunity to try to answer any questions you may have as you're trying to complete the application. We'll be online. It's not a formal presentation. It's more of a conversation. You can touch base with us during those open hours and give us a chance to answer any questions you might have. We're certainly available at other times too if you want to email us at community.development@pittsburghpa.gov. But we do just want to make sure you know about these Q&A sessions coming up. The Q&A sessions, for those sessions, if you go to our website, the Grant Opportunities site, you can register for each of those or all of them if you'd like, so you can participate. So we welcome your participation in one or any of those Q&A sessions. So as was mentioned, the application itself is due on May 28th. And then roughly from May 28th through mid-June, we're going to be looking through those applications to make sure that they are eligible, right? We have HUD guidelines we have to meet, so we have to make sure that the proposed activities actually meet the requirements that have been mentioned by Megan and Josh. Do they meet a public service eligibility requirement, low mod, clientele, whatever it might be? So we have to check eligibility. And then the next step is during the months of June, July, we're going to be meeting with the 9 council districts to talk to them about the proposed activities. So each of these, just to give you a quick background, are allocations that each council district has, $50,000 per council district, and then mayor's office has an allocation. And our role is to, if we could say 20 applications in just council district 1, let's say, we might find that 5 of them don't meet the eligibility requirements, maybe 15 of them do, and we would meet with the council districts to say, okay, these are the 15 qualified applications for 50,000, which organizations meet the needs of the city and interests of the council district, and then ideally, after the end of that, sometime in July, we'd like to have the funding awards announced. And then in August, before the August recess, that's our goal, so that we have legislation done. And then that way, in September, the contracts, agreements with the organizations to provide these services will be completed. And then everyone can do the great work they're going to do to improve the city and provide public services. Next slide, please. So we mentioned this email address and website a couple times, but this is the email we're recommending that everyone use to contact us concerning their public service application, community.development@pittsburghpa.gov. And you can see the website address there. This presentation will be posted on our website. You can see the website listed there. It'll also be available on YouTube, but we'll provide a link to this presentation. So if there are people you know who were not able to make it this afternoon and would like to view it, they can. We'll have it on our website as well. And we'll have the actual PowerPoint available. So if you want to refer back to it, we'll have it available for you. So next slide, please. So I also want to provide you with our own City of Pittsburgh email addresses if you have questions that you'd like to ask us directly. Feel free to reach out to us. Obviously, with COVID, we're not in the office right now, right? We're working from home. So the best way to reach us is via email, not by phone. So next slide, please. So we do thank you for joining us this afternoon. I know we've covered a lot of material, but we do want to open it up to any questions that people have. We'll try to provide answers. If we can't provide any answers immediately, we'll try to get some answers for you and email those responses back out. We will compile some of the questions and the answers and post them. Usually they're common questions that people have across the board, so we'll try to provide that for you. And also, again, I would encourage you, if you have questions, you might this weekend think about the public service grant application. Maybe you're going to be working on it. And if you have questions later on, feel free to join us on one of those Fridays for the Q&A session. And we welcome your involvement at that point.